Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Stand-Up Speakeasy. My name is Shrathney, and every episode of the Stand-Up Speakeasy, I bring on a comic from the Central Time Zone, and sometimes uh, maybe other time zones in the near future. But I was supposed to go on tour, but the pandemic hit, and I couldn't go on tour. So the easiest way is to interview comics from home. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome from all the way from Chicago, Vik Pandya. How are you, Vic? How are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being my guest on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we'll dive right into your comedy journey, and I look forward to talking to you about all the cool adventures that you've gone so far since you first started. So you're a national touring comic from Chicago. What's it like performing stand up in Chicago pre-pandemic?
Oh, Chicago. I was lucky enough to start here. I was born and raised in Chicago, and I think you always hear LA, New York, but Chicago is a place you hear you can get really good here, and nobody notices. But it's kind of a good training ground because you can cut your teeth, and if you're from Chicago, I feel like you have like we write. It's very much like very honest comedy here. Like the Midwest, I feel like is you can try a lot of stuff. They'll give you the chance to try it, but ultimately they're a very honest audience. So it kind of gives you a very solid gauge for wherever you go. And I think Chicago, the reputation of the comics that come out of Chicago is very positive, throughout the nation. So it's kind of nice. Like it set a bar, I think that's good. And I think all the comics that start in Chicago kind of know that hierarchy. So when you start, you immediately have like people to look up to. You immediately have clubs you want to get into. There's so many independent shows. There's so many open mics. So, I mean, you can get on stage 5 to 10 times in a weekend. So, I mean, imagine during the week you can get on stage. Like there's 5 to 10 mics a night. There's probably 3 to 5 shows a night, independent. And then the club, like that's only including clubs. So it's just, once you really get into it in Chicago, I feel like you can maximize your time and you can get really efficient with how you know, produce your own shows. Like that's what one of the routes that I took. But also just like hitting different mics in different spots in the city. You can get different audiences. You can get, more alt comedy. You can get more mainstream. You can get more club audiences. So you really get a really holistic picture of comedy and how to do it for different audiences, which I think is super important. I think Hannibal Buress said, he's like, I did comedy everywhere in the city, not just North Side, not just West Side, because I wanted my material to stand anywhere. And I think you can do that in Chicago, which is very cool to do that in the same city as opposed to having to travel to do it, which you have to often if in smaller scenes.
That's the truth. I live in Florida, so I have to drive 1 hour just to do one mic, and
Oh, that's wild.
yeah, it's brutal, but it breaks up the staying in one city for too long, I guess. But
And
I
you get used to the road in a way. Like that's kind of what it's like. You're driving a lot. People don't understand that if you live in like a city and you never leave your city, and then you first do your first like road weekend, and you're not like your stamina isn't ready for that. So that's kind of good that you have that, and you're going to be more resilient, and you can. Someone made a really funny comment about Zoom comedy. Like the problem with Zoom comedy is you don't have the drive home, which I thought was I thought was so as like people don't know what that means. It's like thinking about the set you just had. Like you had this time by yourself in the car, and you're like, "Wow, I should quit. Like I need to stop. I need to do something different. Like I'm not funny. Like you need that as a comic. You need that kind of like time to reflect. Otherwise, Zoom comedy, you're just like, well, I can just go watch Netflix now. Like it's too easy,
yeah,
And we need to we need to make it tougher.
indeed, and I can only imagine those with like that have vices, like that do drugs and drink alcohol, and they can be like, well, now I can do my drugs and alcohol off this camera now, and then try to pass out.
Yeah, man, it's like everyone has it's too it makes it you don't feel the bomb, you don't feel it as much. And I think that's why there's been a lot of people starting comedy, which is good. Like I'm all for people starting, but it's also like we had enough to begin with, man. We don't need more. Like we gotta weed people out, which I feel like the live weeds people out. Like people who don't last past 1 year. I mean, that's a huge percentage of people, right? So it's not like Zoom is good because it's letting us still stay sharp in a way during all this, but it's giving people a false sense of security about what comedy is really like. Because when they go live, it's not this supportive. I'll tell you that.
No way. Absolutely not, for sure. And so your comedy is a sharp self-deprecation, observational humor on dating, and hilarious crowd work, a combination of three. And how did you find your voice in stand-up comedy?
I think for me, obviously, like everyone says, get on stage as much as possible. I know for me, when I started comedy, I didn't come from like, the typical finance, typical comedy route. I came from like a business major in college. I didn't start comedy until my first job. So I was like a professional in like the working business world. And then I started doing comedy. So everything that I approached comedy with was kind of from that lens. So I was a very much like a bro. And I feel like that was what my comedy was. It was very one-sided, is very like male perspective heavy. And I would just kind of say crazy shit. And I realized through doing mics, like that's not like, it may resonate with comedians, but it didn't resonate with normal audiences because I was only providing kind of one perspective. And I think that kind of opened my eyes to seeing like, oh, there's like a whole side of this that I'm missing. Like I'm not giving that, whether it's the female side or whatever it may be, like whatever the other side of the topic I was talking about was basically the lesson. And I think that just got beaten into me from doing open mics and doing shows for like paying audience members versus doing like, open mic type shows. And I kind of got to see like, oh, if it doesn't kill at a mic, that doesn't mean it's not a good joke. It just means it may not have resonated with comedians, but with normal audiences, like you don't need to go to level 10. At a mic, you might need to go to level 10 to get some response because we're all so jaded and we've heard everything. But for a normal audience, like you just maybe need to go to a 5. Like you don't need to dial it up to what you think you do. So I think that's why when you first transition to start doing shows from mics, you come across like really maybe aggressive or maybe, kind of a little like standoffish, but that's just because you've come up in such a hostile way. So for me, I think those experiences kind of shaped my comedy. And then I really found like, because I trained as an improviser at Second City. So I obviously understood the process of like a set list and writing jokes, but I really liked the parts of comedy that I wasn't prepared for, like all the improv stuff. Like if a joke didn't land, like what I would say to recover, or like if something happened in the room, what I said to address it. And I think that kind of grew into like my voice was like, I'm kind of the guy who says what everyone's thinking, but is too afraid to say. So then I kind of started applying that lens to all the material I have. And it really became this thing where I'm like, oh, I can get away with a lot of stuff because it's like a lot of situational things. And I'm saying it in like, we're all thinking it. I'm just the one saying it. So I think that kind of influenced me a lot. And I'm still finding my voice. I mean, I've been doing it now for 5+ years, but that's still baby in terms of a stand-up, like 10 years is what they say it takes to find your voice. So I think it's still developing. For me, it's just about putting myself in like uncomfortable situations and seeing how I get out of it is kind of like where I find a lot of entertainment now. Because I get bored doing the exact same set. So I try to like come with something new every time, for the audience as well as for myself.
Indeed, I totally understand. It's like there's I perform mostly in Daytona Beach, so I give my audience like the rawest, the dirtiest, everything I can, just throw against the wall. But then when I perform in front of like old folks, it's like they just don't get it, and I'm like, oh well, it doesn't work for everybody. So
yeah, and it's also like I said, like where you are too, right? Like I just did the show yesterday where it's a private gig at a motorcycle dealership. So you can imagine the people at the gig are people who've purchased these motorcycles, and it's like, I'm not going to say what motorcycle brand it is, but it's a very specific type of motorcycle brand. So everyone was very much like the same. The demographics in the room were the same. So I'm not going to go in there and do all my like hot racial material. I'm not going to do that. Like I'm going to do some dirtier stuff, some relationship stuff, but more stuff that's like topical, I'd say. And you have to adapt, you have to adapt to your room. So I did a lot more crowd work. I talked to the people versus just going through like, here are the new bits I want to do. I try to work in a couple of them, but I also understood like my job as an entertainer, like I'm here to make these people laugh. And like, I have enough material that I can do it. It may not be the most fun for me, but it's kind of the job that we have is like, we have to make the room, whatever room we're in, we have to make it work. And I think as a comedian, you get hired for something like that. You got to understand that. So it is like now that's why I'm excited for Chicago to open again. Cause I can now go to different rooms and do all these different jokes that I've been writing that are kind of more like, I'd say more, I don't know if modern's the right word, but just like more woke or more whatever it may be, just more like pop culture stuff that they're not going to get in the motorcycle dealership, you know, like I have to go to the specific people that would get these jokes. So it's like you're constantly working on. I feel like I have like 8 different work streams of jokes that I'm like, all right, these ones I got to do when I get to this thing, or like these, like it's hard to sometimes keep track, but it's kind of like everything's pushing forward slowly together.
Indeed. Back in 2019, your album comedy Friends with 401k Benefits debuted at #1 on iTunes and hit the top 10 on the Billboard charts. And what was that feeling like when that both happened?
It was wild because we actually the other comics who it's a joint album between myself, Tyler Fowler, and Megan Dirty, all out of Chicago, and we were actually at the radio station in Chicago called WGN, which is like a pretty big radio show, and we were promoting the album, and we were kind of like it came out, and then basically how to get #1, what you have to do is hit a certain amount of plays or like downloads on like day 1, and then that pushes it up in the charts. So you can actually pre-sell the album before it comes out. So then everyone who purchased the album like before it comes out, that counts towards like day 1 plays or downloads. So we basically a month before we set the date. We're like, it's coming out on March 6th, which is actually my birthday. And we're like, everyone buy this album. So we kind of started racking up pre-sales. And then the day it came out, then we can go check the charts to see if it gets #1. Because if enough people bought it on pre-sale and the day of, it will drive it up to the charts. So it was like, I think we were like doing this radio at like 10 p.m. the day it came out. So we're really just like on there live. We're talking about the album. We're promoting it to more people because we're just trying to drive up, people buying it and drum up interest. And then I think at like 11:30, like it hit #1. So we're on the radio. It hits #1. And it's like, I think it was like a Wednesday or something. And so we're like, it was really cool because we're literally talking about it. We're talking about the process. It hits #1. And then we're like, all right, we got to go like celebrate. But it's like, it's pretty late and it was a weekday. So we went to like this really like nice place in Chicago called the Chicago Athletic Association. And we had like, we popped champagne, we did it right. But it's just really funny because we were just kind of in shock. We didn't expect, because you can't tell how many people what the number is to go #1. Like, I don't know what the value was. They don't tell you how many people are downloading it before. Like, you don't know the pre-sale amount. So it was kind of crazy because we've been pushing it for the whole month, but we didn't know how many people it would actually take. So it was really funny because the next day, what we had done is we had organized a pop-up comedy show to help again go #1. And we're like, everyone who buys the album gets free access to the show. So that was the ticket, was like, get the album. And we had an unadvertised headliner that we couldn't like publicize, but it was Sam Morril. So we had Sam because Sam was opening for Aziz Ansari at the Chicago Theater, which is across the street from my house. So we DM'd Sam on Instagram and we're like, hey, we got a show. I saw you're at the Chicago Theater. We have a show nearby if you want to come and do a spot. And he's like, yeah, totally. So we didn't have a show when we told him this. We just said this. We just made it up. And then once he said yes, we're like, fuck, we got 24 hours to put a show on. So in 24 hours, we messaged everyone we knew. We're like, here's a pop-up album release show we're doing. It's going to be awesome. It's like BYOB. Like I have a great space in my building that we throw shows at sometimes. So it gets around all the like event and venue hurdles, it's just like, it's our own space. I can throw it up really quickly. So we had like 75 people come out because we told people, like we told all the comics who this headliner was, but we kind of like left it unadvertised. So we actually did that because we wanted like 75 more people to buy the album. We didn't even need to do that because we already went #1. But at that point, it was kind of a relief because then we were almost like, it was a celebratory show. It was almost like we're just having fun. Sam is super nice. Like, he's awesome. We got to hang with him. He actually talked about us on a podcast, which was really cool because he's like, I just did these shows with these Chicago comics and it was super fun. And he opens for Aziz, comes and does our show, and then goes back while Aziz is still on stage. And Aziz has no idea. He left the show to do it, which was awesome because he's like, I guess, I don't know if Aziz was cool with him doing that or whatever, but like it's like we're small time compared to Aziz, so who cares? But for us, it was like a huge deal, right? We get Sam Morril, like this incredible comedian. So that whole like week was awesome. There's just so many cool things that happened. It was like the radio show, finding out on the air live, celebrating, and then the next day with the show. So we just were like riding that high for a while, which was just like made it. And it was my birthday week too. So it just made it like it was like my birthday got a little overshadowed. I'll be honest. It got a little overshadowed. I was like, hey, don't forget, it's my birthday and it's an album show. Like, don't forget this. But like, it was just so cool to share that experience with like all of our fans and also each other, because we were like, we put so much work into that album, and just the execution of it and like learning how to do all that stuff. It was like a big relief to be like, it paid off, and I'm glad we did it right and like waited, because that was our dream was to do that, but we're like, let's wait and do it right. Like we set a really far date so we could get everything in order, because there's so many moving pieces with that. So it was just like, it was one of those things where I think I would do it again. And now that I do it again, I'd be like, now we can do it even better, which is going to be awesome. Like we did it, I think, to really high level, but we can even now, with the knowledge we have and the material we've built, like our goal is to, I think, do another one, a joint one, but like maybe do it in a different format, in like a theater or something.
Indeed, I gotta definitely check it out and all that good stuff, and support you, and hopefully it'll go number one again. Even though it's
That's
been a
the
couple of
goal.
years.
Yeah, I saw a really funny tweet. I think it was this comic, Zahid Dewji out of Houston, one of my friends. He goes, "If your album doesn't go number one, quit." And I thought that was so funny. Like, because I feel like it's not as hard. You know, that's like a little industry insight. It's not as hard as people think. I mean, it's probably like 100 downloads or something, which, if you think about it, to go number one, to get 100 people to do it, isn't crazy, because you're number one for. It depends how long you're number one. So we were number one for like 4 days in a row, which means it had a lot more than 100. But if you really wanted to just say you're number one, you could be number one for a minute. You know, it's technically you got the screenshot. It says number one, you're good. But that doesn't mean you're consistently getting downloads over the week it's out or whatever. So that's why I think we charted on Billboard too, is because we had a consistent amount of downloads for the whole week it debuted. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made Billboard.
Indeed, most definitely. Speaking of other famous folks you've opened for, you opened for Roy Wood Jr. and what was that like?
That kind of put me on the map a little bit in Chicago, because I think I was like 8 months into comedy. I was very new. I was hitting it pretty aggressively. I was like going, you know, every week I'd go to like my 4 or 5 different mics. I try new ones, but I'd had one I would love to go to at this dive bar up north called Finley Dunn's, and it was called Pat Kent Comedy Practice. It was the name of the open mic, and the guy who ran it was called Pat Kent, and he's just really, really funny dude, like one of the most naturally funny people I know. Improviser guy, like he started as an improviser, but he just was one of those character kind of stand-ups, like just a such an asshole, but like in the best way, just really big dude, just a presence on stage. So he'd had this mic that like 8 people would come to. It was not good, but I was so new that I was like, I want to go to this mic because I don't want anyone to know who I am yet. Like I want to get good before I go to like the better mics and get seen or whatever. So I would go there every week and I'd like really try. Like I come with new material. I'd like work on shit, and I got a lot of that stuff that I mentioned at the top. Like I had to say a lot of crazy stuff to kind of find where the line was and find what I really wanted to talk about. So that room gave me a lot of like opportunities to do that, because I was like able to just kind of do it in obscurity, you know. Bill Burr talked about, I love this phrase. He said, killing in obscurity. I was bombing in obscurity. You know, I was out here bombing, but no one knew. Like I was just some guy. And then I was like hitting it for a couple months, you know, pretty consistently. And then I remember I get a call from Pat, and he's like, hey, we're doing a show at where we do the mic. And it's a very tiny room. Okay. Keep in mind, it's a back room of a bar. It can probably it had like 10 tables there and in a corner. It was like a 20 by 20 room. And he's like, it's going to be like 50 people. And I was just thinking in my mind, I'm like, this is going to be insane. If there's 50 people in this room, it's going to be packed. And so he's like, we got a really, the headliner, I can't tell you who it is. It's someone who's like a really legit nationally touring comic. So do you want to open? And I'm like, of course, you know, I'm not going to say no, but he didn't tell me who it was. So he's like, just do like 7 or 8 minutes at the top. We just need someone high energy, who's funny and who can set the show off right. So, and he's like, then me and a couple other people are gonna do some time, and then we're gonna bring up the headliner. Then the day before the show, he tells me who it is, and he goes, by the way, it's Roy Wood Jr. And I'm like, I'm a big Daily Show fan, and so I was like, Roy Wood Jr. Like, he had just gotten on the Daily Show, he was just kind of popping off. So I was like, now I'm getting nervous, you know. I'm like, it's Roy Wood Jr. Like, I can't fuck this up. But I was so happy and so excited that I do the show. And the show, like I said, the room was insane because it was packed. They put 60 people in this room that could probably fit like 20. You know, it was wild, and it was like a corner stage, so everyone was kind of focused. So I come in and just like that clip. So they also recorded it in HD. So I got a 1080p clip with like amazing audio of 7 minutes, which is like the perfect clip length. As you know, like you want a 5 to 7 minute clip for everything. So I get this great clip, and then while I'm on stage, I see Roy like watching my set. So he watches most of my set, and I had a very good set, and because the room was like set, I was set up to succeed. Like there was no way I could really fuck that up. So after the set, Roy does like 2 hours, and this is before he released his fatherhood special, his first Comedy Central special. So I saw him work that material out, and it was just so good. Like what he didn't even do on the special, he did more than that, and it was all like killer stuff. So after the show, we're all kind of hanging out in the bar, and like I'm talking to Roy, and he's just like super nice. He's like, that bit you have, he's like, give me notes. Like he's like talking about bits. So we're like chopping it up about bits. And he's like, yeah, man, like anytime you're in New York, like hit me up, like I'd love to help you out. So he like gave me his email and his phone number, and he was just like a nice guy. And we traded some messages on like some material back and forth. And then we just stayed in touch. So when I went to New York a couple years later, he's like, here, I got your tickets to the Daily Show. So he hooked me up. So I got to go watch the show and everything, like just like got in, and it's just like a nice dude. Like he doesn't need to do this. Like I'm nobody, I'm a comic who's like a year in, and this guy's on Comedy Central. And it was just like one of those things where it's like giving me something to aspire to, because it's just like I hit him up for random advice sometimes, and he's always responsive. And it's just like really cool to have that connection. Because then through that, like from that credit and that clip, I got into like 20 comedy festivals like the next year. Like I got into way too many things that I was not ready for, but I got into them because I had a really good clip and that credit. And then in Chicago, I started getting booked on a lot more shows because of that too. Because now I'm like the guy who opened for Roy Wood Jr. So it helped a lot, kind of establish me early on. And then that kind of, from year 1 to 2, that like was a huge jump off point for me.
Indeed. I was fortunate enough to catch him in Jacksonville. And I went up to him and I said, hey, Roy, I'm a stand-up comedy journalist. Would you like to be interviewed? And he said yes, and I got to interview him for a little bit.
Awesome.
So I'll send you that link as soon as it.
Yeah, please. Yeah, he's the nicest guy ever, and he's like such a smart. The way he breaks down bits and comedy is really insightful. I think even if you're a comedy fan or a comic, like I remember he was at Comedy on State, like one of the best comedy clubs in the country, and I hadn't worked there yet. So the way to get into Comedy on State is either do the open mic or get brought in by the headliner. So I hit him up. I'm like, hey man, can I come do a guest spot so they see me? And he's like, of course. And he's like, he's like, send me a clip. And he's like, then I'll send it to the club. That way they know who you are, and I'm not just like forcing the guest spot. So he's even thoughtful about that stuff rather than me just come and be like, he's like, here's a guest spot that I have. He's like, I'll send like your stuff to them beforehand. So that way they have you in mind and they already kind of approve it, rather than me force it on them. So it's like, even the way he like does things like that is thoughtful. So I remember I was there with him. We're hanging out in the green room of Comedy on Stage, and that room is insane. So just like that little stuff, like, he's just been really solid throughout the whole way. And we were just talking about different comedy styles, and he like broke down a bit, and just the way he thinks about it, like he thinks in jokes. It's crazy.
Man, that is pretty rad. And so you also opened up for Michelle Wolf too. And what was that like?
So that was, like I said, I got into all these festivals, right, from that kind of Roy Wood credit and clip. And one of the ones I got into, I think this was actually maybe a year or so later. So I was like probably 2 years in at this point. And this was the Trill Comedy Festival in Houston. So it was a newer festival, mainly an improv theater called the Station Theater in Houston. But they added a stand-up kind of portion to it. And they're like, you get to open for Michelle Wolf is headlining the festival. And this is also when Michelle was basically just popping off as well. Like she was on the Daily Show, but she was really starting to get her own kind of acclaim. So for this smaller festival to have this was a pretty big deal. They're like, when you're a headliner, you headline a lot of festivals, but it was like, there was really no reason she needed to be in Houston for this. Like it didn't really make sense. So I saw that, I happened to see it, and I was just trying to get into as many festivals as I could. So I applied. And then they're like, okay, we have basically, I don't know how many comics applied, but they only had 2 stand-up spots on the entire festival. And then that was just opening for Michelle. So that was it. Like if you get it, you get to open for Michelle. So it was me and this guy, Andy Huggins, who's like a 90-year-old comedian in Houston, who's insanely funny. Like we're not even in the same sphere of, like, he was so much more qualified to be on the show than me. So they had a local host. Then I think I went up, then Andy went up, and then Michelle went up. And they're like, you're doing 17 minutes, which is like a weird set time, right? But also the most amount of time I'd done in comedy at that point. So I'm like nervous. I'm like, do I have 17 minutes? I'm like, I have like 6 minutes. Like, I don't think I have 17 minutes. Like I have 4 5-minute sets, but they're all like not put together. So that kind of forced me to put together that set. So I get to Houston, and the show's at like 11 p.m. It's like the last show of the festival. So packed out, obviously because Michelle Wolf is closing. So I get to meet her and hang out with her and like talk with her, and then just do the set, and then watch like this guy Andy go up and crush too. And it was just a really cool vibe. And like, then after that, I made a really good connection with the people in Houston, and Michelle was super nice. And I ran into her a couple years later at the Comedy Cellar, and she remembered. She's like, oh, thanks. So like we were just talking, because she was running new material at that point. She was like, now at this point, she's a mainstream headliner. So she was just, dropping in to do new material. And so she's like, yeah, that show was so fun. Like we kind of like reconnected. So it was just very cool to be like, I'm like, at this point, I'm Hassan Minhaj. Like I just need to open up for one more person on the Daily Show and take their job. And then I'm in, man. Like it was just like, it just happened to be all Daily Show people. And it just happened to be 2 phenomenal comedians that really were like on the way up. So it was just the timing of it all was so fortuitous for me, and I think for them, because they were just like, for them, it was just like they happened to be there at the right place, right time. Like it was one of those things that, but yeah, I'm like obsessed with Michelle Wolf. Her seal joke is like one of my favorite bits of all time. There's just, Roy has so many good bits too. They're just like, they make me feel bad about my comedy, which I think is really good for a comedian to always have someone to be like, oh, that's comedy, like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but that's stand up.
Indeed, most definitely. And you're also you perform regularly at Zany's Comedy Club and Laugh Factory in Chicago. And what are your favorite memories from those 2 venues?
I think Zany's is my home club. I performed, like I got my picture on the wall there. That was a huge moment for me, signing my headshot. That was in 2018, I think. So being like a paid regular at Zany's, which is like, I mean, that club is like 40 plus years old. There's so much history in that room in Chicago, and like just walking in there every time, you're like, this is the A room, this is it. And Zany's in Chicago is a traditional like host feature headliner club. So you get to work with incredible comedians. So it's really been helpful for me to just like sit in the green room with Dan Soder and talk about comedy. Like there's so much of comedy that you learn from watching other comics, but you also learn from just like sitting with them and just shooting the shit. So I've learned so much by being in the room with all these people, like getting to open for Veerdas at Zany's, like things like that, where it's like international comics and nationally touring, like globally comedians. So Zany's has been there's been so many memories there. Like I said, the picture on the wall was a big deal, and getting past there. And then from that, I think when I started like really trying to attack the clubs, I interned at a comedy club called the Comedy Bar in Chicago, which is, now they're in a couple other locations, but they're only in Chicago at the time. So I interned there, and then I kind of like was like, okay, now I'm going to try to get into Zany's, but Zany's is the toughest one. But I was like, I know they're going to offer more consistent work because it's host feature headliner. So if you're on the show, you work like the whole week usually. You're hosting for the whole month. They have month-long MC spots, which is crazy. So nowhere else can you do that. So I was like, this is the one I want to aspire to, because they're the most work out of all the clubs. Because I'll do spots at the Laugh Factory, spots at the Comedy Bar now, but it's like you do maybe 1 or 2 shows on a Saturday, and then you're done for till the next week. but that's because they're showcase clubs, right? Traditionally. So Zanies is like you work the whole month. And I was like, that's like, when I thought about it, I was like, that's like 10 shows a week, 10 plus potentially. You're getting a ton of stage time. You're working with great headliners. I was like, this is what I want to do. So I just worked to get in there. And once I got in there, that helped me get into like all the other rooms. Cause then I had that kind of the Zanies brand. And I was like, if you feature and hosted Zanies, you can kind of work anywhere. So it really helped like put me on the map again in the sense of the clubs. Cause then I was on the map in the community, but the clubs didn't know who the fuck I was because I wasn't doing any of the clubs. I was just kind of doing my own shows with Tyler and Meg. We were producing these insane, like really crazy shows in downtown Chicago that people were like, what is this? Like, I remember someone from Second City came to the show and they're like, he took one of the flyers because we're all like, Tyler and Meg come from the advertising industry. I come from like finance and HR. So we had run the shows like we ran an event at work. Like we had like professional graphic design. Like we designed all this cool shit. We had like running orders and lineups that were like take home prints. And they just looked really nice. And we had like PowerPoints with all the performer info. So I remember the guy came and he took one of the flyers and he's like, we saw him a couple of weeks later. He's like, I went to Second City and I put the flyer down and he's like, I told them, he's like, this is our competition. Like these guys are doing better shows than we're doing. And they're just doing it, 3 people doing it themselves at an office building in downtown Chicago. So like, that's how big the shows were getting, where it was like getting acclaim within the city. But again, like I said, the clubs don't know any of this information. So once I started working at the clubs, they're all like, oh, like I've heard of you, but like, how come you never come here? I was like, I never wanted to just hang out at the clubs. I never wanted to kind of just be there. My thing was always, I want to be good enough. So when I show up, they're like, oh, like you can work here now. Like I wanted the first impression to be a solid lasting impression. So I always was like, I'd rather take a longer time to get there. But then when I get there, I'm like over prepared. And I think that, and then doing Zanies and doing all these other things where you're getting the reps, like you're getting so many reps that you just feel like on all the time. Then I started having much more confidence. But the Laugh Factory has been incredible too. Like, I mean, I got to work with like, I think one of the shows I did, Ronnie Cheng was on. Like, there's so many drop-ins at the Laugh Factory because everyone can just like pop in. There's so many shows, and I got to showcase for Kenan Thompson for his like SNL showcase. So I gotten to do a lot of cool things there as well. And stand up NBC, I've done that a couple years. Made it to the quarterfinals of that. So like all these little things, like you have to really try to do everything, in my opinion. And I think the clubs are, once you're a consistent club comic, you can get a lot of doors open for you because they rely on you. Even when they're open during the pandemic, it's 50-person capacity. So they're not working people that they know, like they don't know. They're working people that they can trust because they're like, hey, if you can kill for 10 people on a Tuesday, we trust you to do 50 people during a pandemic that are socially distant because they're not going to take a chance on somebody they don't know. So it really was important to kind of get these inroads and these relationships on with these clubs because, I just was always I'm a big fan of like do the work and then let it speak for you. Like I would kind of hit up everyone like once a month, every couple months, but I was never annoying. You kind of want to be like, if someone doesn't respond to you, like take a hint and be like, maybe I need a new clip, maybe I need some new material, whatever I need, like go and work on yourself and then come back. And then hopefully they're like, okay, you've improved or like whatever has happened, like you've made a change. So I mean, I can't thank the clubs in Chicago enough because it's made me, the comic I am now. And they're all so different, but they're also similar in a lot of ways. But like I said, the audience thing at the top, like they all have their own audiences, which has also helped me kind of figure out how to navigate different audiences in different rooms as well.
Indeed. And you spoke of working with Dan Soder and speaking with him about comedy. And what was that like working with Dan Soder?
He was, I mean, he's phenomenal. Like if you've seen his stand up, like one of the funniest dudes, and just his voice is so distinct that when he like speaks, I feel like he's one of those voices that you just have to pay attention to. So I was lucky enough to open for him at Zanies, and I remember just in the green room, like some headliners, they're more like they show up right before, they're supposed to go on, or they kind of hang out in a different spot of the club, like where you don't really go. He was just like, he was there before I was there and I was hosting. So like usually I get there kind of earlier, and he was already just hanging out in the green room and he's just like having a beer and just like, we just started talking. Like he was very approachable, and he was just like, yeah, man, like you're here the whole weekend. Like I was like, yep, I'm here the whole month. And we were just kind of chatting about other comics who are coming through. Big J Okerson was there the week before, and I got to work with him. And obviously, they do the Bonfire together, their podcast and everything. So he was just like, we're talking about Big J stories, and he was just like, it was fun to watch him work because you get to see these people do the same, like their headlining set at least 3 or 4 times on the weekend, if not more. So I normally don't watch the headliner until like the last like day or so, maybe the Saturday show or whatever, because I'm going to see it so many times. So I actually watched his a couple different times, and he was like adding shit, like he was like doing different things. And then I remember the late show on Saturday, Zanies used to do 3 shows on Saturday. So you do a 7, a 9, and 11:15 show, which is like crazy. Like it's tiring because you're there for like 6 hours, but if you're headlining, you're doing like 3+ hours. Like you're doing a lot of comedy. So the Saturday late show is like my favorite show because it's just like fast and loose. Like people are drunk, audience and comics, maybe people have been hanging out too long. And so like you get to see people kind of just break from their normal set pattern. So I got to see him do his set, but he did it in a completely different order. And he also just did a lot more like riffing and improv, and it was so good. And he told me about how he like built his closer. His closer took him like 4 years to build, and it's just like really crazy stuff. So he just was like a really nice, approachable dude. And every day he would have a new like riff on me. Like he'd go up and he's like, keep it going for, your feature and your host. And he'd have a couple of jokes on each person, like kind of summarizing the show. And every day was different. And it was like so funny. Like he would just pick apart different things. I was wearing like a suit, I think, one day. And he's like, Vic looks like a substitute teacher on parole. Like just like really funny, like very specific roasts that were just awesome. So like I love doing that stuff. Like I love the topical jokes. So like it just really, I was like, this guy gets it. Like this guy's from a classic comedian that, likes to mess with people. And yeah, just a phenomenal dude.
Indeed. And you spoke of Big J Okerson being there before Dan, a week before. And what was that like working with Big J Okerson?
So I, like you mentioned in my bio, like one of my things I really like and try to do a lot of is crowd work. And Zany's helped me kind of build that muscle because as a host, you're encouraged to do crowd work, and you're kind of like, you kind of do it like that's the start of the show, right? Like you're up there for 15, 20 minutes and you kind of do mainly the standard crowd work, but you're up there enough time to like do some crowd work and then go into material. So it's a nice, like, it gives you that breathing room. And so I've gotten, because of just the excessive amount of like shows I've done hosting there, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I'm pretty decent with it. But then you see someone like Big J go and do it, and his crowd work is just like next level. Like he's calling back shit from 30 minutes prior. Like he's looping everyone in. And then you're like, my crowd work is here and his is like here, you really get to see the level. And it's so funny. He's so calm and confident with it. And just like the way he delivers it is not like he's saying some fucked up shit, but the way he says it is kind of disarming, so he can get away with it. So I feel like it showed me like kind of if you sit in the pocket, for a lot of crowd work, a lot of people try to rush and go quickly, but if you sit in the pocket, you can, usually get out of it, or you can also, they'll provide the funny thing. Like they may say something else because of the silence. So I just watching him, it really showed me kind of these other ways to take crowd work. And also another guy who's just the nicest dude ever, like hanging out, he just, and what I don't understand about him is I never saw him like go over his set. Like he would just smoke outside until he's going on stage, go on stage, murder for like 45, 50 minutes, and then just do it all again the next day. Like, I think one of those guys who just has it. He's just on all the time. And I think he's so improvisational and so good at crowd work that he probably has like 4 or 5 bits he's going to do, but he's going to do 70% of the show is going to be improvised. So for him, he's like, it wasn't like stressful for him. But I just was always impressed by that, because I was like, oh, that's what I like doing. Is like, now what I'll do is if I'm doing 15 minutes, I'll go on stage with like 6 minutes of bits, and then the rest I'll figure it out. If I'm hosting, I'll do crowd work, or I'll like think of other bits as I'm up there. But I like to kind of keep myself a little bit underprepared. That way I'm forced to kind of, think of other ways to get out of it, and forced to do more crowd work just to keep that muscle sharp.
Indeed. And I remember watching this next comic, Godfrey, on Vlad TV and stuff, and And what
Godfrey.
was that? What was that like working with Godfrey?
Yeah, so Godfrey, one of the things I got to do that is in partnership with NBC and Second City is this thing called not Stand Up NBC. What is it called? The Chicago Comedy Breakout Festival, Stand Up NBC Breakout Festival, NBC Breakout Festival. Sorry, this is too many festivals. Getting confused. But that one is really cool because, like I said, it's between Second City and NBC. So I had done this thing called Stand Up NBC already. So they kind of knew who I was, and then Second City, I'd come from there, but as an improviser, like anyone can take improv classes. So Second City didn't really know, but then once I had the NBC kind of thing, and then I had the Second City background, I think it came together, and my resume from comedy. But what they do is they showcase like 10 to 20 kind of stars or breakout people they want to highlight, and they're usually all like people who are of diverse backgrounds. And then they bring that together with like agents and managers and other people. So it's a kind of a nice like audition in a way. And you get to kind of like, it's a really prestigious festival in Chicago, and it's a good one to have under your belt. So I got to do that, and Godfrey hosted like one of the stand-up like blocks. Like there was a couple days they did stand-up, and he hosts it. So I think he does it pretty much every year because I saw him doing, I think, last year too. But Godfrey has always been one of my favorites. Like I saw him, I don't know where I discovered him. I think it was a long time ago. I think I saw one of his bits on YouTube, and then I just like stayed following him. But he is like one of the most underrated, just murderers of all time. Like he was doing this show. There's like 12 comics on this show, so it's a long show. He is doing material between everybody, but it's like it's all shit that I've never heard. He didn't repeat anything, and he also did like it's all based off what the person just talked about. Like he probably has like 7 hours of comedy like content, probably more, because he's been doing it for 25-30 years, so he just has amassed this bulk of material. But it was so good. Like he kept the audience. The whole purpose of the show is to make we're like showcasing, so he really built up every comic the best way they could be built up. Like he made sure it was set right, even if I think I went up like kind of close to the end on one of the shows, and it's like it's been 2 hours at this point, and normally a comedy show at 2 hours is like that's when it's going to start to the energy is going to start to dip, it's too long. But he was just such a good host that he was able to keep the energy up, and then just like again another dude got to hang out with him a little bit after the show, but just a nice guy. Like he has like Chicago roots, so he like felt he feels connected to everyone in Chicago. But yeah, just watching him, I was like, this guy is untouchable. Like, I don't think he's definitely in my top 5 of all time, because he's such a good, like such an imposing comic in the sense of like he can get really intense and really aggressive, and he can do that and hold your attention, but then at the same time he can flip it in like a moment's notice and still control the room. It's like really impressive to watch, and I just don't understand why everybody doesn't know who he is. It's one of those things.
Indeed, I remember seeing him on Comic View or on like and other shows like that, and stand-up shows, and man, he definitely brings it, and it's pretty rad you got to open for him. And earlier you spoke of opening up for bring on the same bill as Verdos, and what was that like?
Yeah, so actually, like some inside scoop on that. That's kind of funny. Like I haven't talked about this too much because I don't know. Well, whatever, it doesn't matter. But so I'm hosting the whole month at Zanies. Verdos is so when you host the whole month at Zanies, the one in Chicago, at least how it works, is you do all the shows unless it's like a special event or like a podcast or something weird. But if it's a stand-up show, 99% of the time you do the show. So Verdos is on like a couple weeks away, and then he's supposed to like come through. So I'm like, this is awesome. I get to work with him. Like, I always enjoyed his comedy, and I'm just like, it would be cool to work with someone who's also like a famous Indian comedian, like someone who's who looks like me, who's made it to this degree of success. And then like the day of the show, I get a message from the club, and they're like, yeah, you don't need to come tonight. Like, you're good. You're like, you can have today off. And I was like, well, I've invited like 40 people to come to this show, and they didn't give me any explanation. And then, so I know the manager really well. So that was from like the head booker, who just kind of like is very like business. So like he just is all business. So I knew it was something like kind of sketchy, but I didn't know what it was. So I was like, fuck this, man. I'm showing up. I'm showing up to this club. I'm like, I put too much effort into this to not come here, right? So I show up. I was like, at the very least, I'll watch the show, right? Whatever. I mean, I can get in. So I get there and it's packed, right? It's insanely packed. So I'm in the green room, talking to the manager, and he's like, yeah, apparently, like, you know, they didn't want another, like, Virdas didn't want another Indian comedian opening, like, because in case I might step on his material or something. And I was like, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I'll ask him what, you know, if there's anything I can. Yeah, I always ask the headliner, like, what do you want me to not talk about? But like, I also get it. Like, it's his show. You know, I was pissed at the time. I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, we're all supposed to be helping each other, you know. But I'm like, if I was him, I'd probably be like, well, I don't want another Indian dude. You know, not necessarily. Like, I don't know. I don't know what I'd do in his position. But so, but then since I was already there, he's like, just do a spot. Like, just go up and do a spot. And then Virdas actually came in and I was talking with him. So the manager's like, yeah, he's cool with it. Just do a spot on the show. We'll have someone else host. So he was nice, and he was really, like, actually really nice. And I was asking him some advice and stuff. And so it quickly turned from me being like angry with him to me being like, oh, this guy's actually a really nice dude and like thoughtful. And then he was like, yeah, like, he's like, please, like, open. I think he just didn't want the host to be Indian. So I don't know what his rationale was, but he still let me do a spot on the show. So and actually I preferred that because then I could just sit down and watch the rest of the show and not worry about, you know, going back up and forth. And it was just interesting because it's like, he wasn't somebody who I was expecting to be that like giving, because he's like Kevin Hart level famous in India. Like, he's huge. So for him to even play Zanies is weird. Like, he should be playing like the Chicago Theater. Like, I feel like he's big enough. But yeah, so I got to do that and work with him, and he just gave me some great advice, and it was just like a nice dude. But it was funny because people don't know that story about like how I almost didn't get to do the show. You know, people don't know. But like I said, luckily he was a very nice man, and he was very cool about it. Let me do it. And but I was like, it's like a moment of panic because you're like, fuck, I'm not, like, I invited all these people to the show, and now I'm like getting kicked off my own show. And you get very attached as if you're the host of Zanies because you're like, that's your show. Like, you run. I used to run the lights. Like, I used to do everything. Like, I used to do a lot of the different parts of the club that people don't realize. You're running the show. So I felt very protective of it, and so I was lucky he let me still do the show. And I'll never. I think once I get a little more successful, I'm gonna ask him straight up. I'm like, yo, do you remember in Chicago of 2017 or whatever the fuck it was, where you said you didn't want me to host? I'm like, what's up with that? But no, I feel like I said, he overpaid in his advice and letting me do the spot.
Indeed, I'm so glad you got to share the story on the stand-up.
I know. I feel like, damn, man, I'm gonna get canceled for this. Hopefully, he doesn't come after me.
And you also opened for Zakir Khan, I believe. And then what? How did that experience work out for you?
That was random because so yeah, I didn't know who he was at all because Zakir Khan is like also massive in India, but I had no idea. I don't speak really Hindi or Gujarati or any of the other Indian languages, so I'm just like very much a coconut. Like, I do stand up in English. I do a lot of Indian shows because I'm Indian, but I like know the cultures, and I have a lot of material that's Indian, but I don't speak any of the languages. So he does stand up mainly in Hindi, I think, and Gujarati, but he mixes some English in. So because I opened for Virdas and got that kind of like moniker in Chicago, and I've done all these private Indian shows and stuff, I'm known as like the resident Indian comedian in Chicago, apparently. So I got a call from somebody. I don't really know how they got my information. And they're like, hey, Zakir Khan is going to be in Skokie, which is a suburb of Chicago. And he's playing a theater. And he's like, they want someone local to open. So of course, I'm like, I'm not going to turn down a theater gig. And I was like, cool. Like, I made it seem like I knew who he was. I was like, yeah, I know who Zakir Khan is. I was like, of course, I love Zakir Khan. And so I do some research on him. I'm like, this guy's fucking huge. Like, he's huge in India. And so I do the show. What's cool about his fans is, even though he does stand up, like I said, in Hindi, his fans are like young, hip Indian people. So all of them are bilingual. So like, I'm doing stand up in English, but they're all like really liking my material because they are, you know, kind of the exact audience that I like at comedy shows normally. Like, they're just like younger millennials. So I was kind of nervous initially But he was like, I like killed it because it was just such a good audience. And it was only like, I think I only did like 12 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. It was just me and him. Like I just brought him up after that. So it was very like informal for like how big it was. Like it was sold out. Like this is a massive theater in Skokie. And they're just like, yeah, do some time and then like intro him. And I was like, well, what do you want me to say? Like, do you have anything? Like, you're just like, yeah, like whatever. And it was just like very casual, it was just very much like, I expected more production for a theater show, but I guess he was just very much like, I do this much time, you do this much time. And he came in and he was kind of skeptical. I think when he came in, he was a little, he was very much like, he's like, who are you? And I was like, oh, I'm opening for you. And he's like, how long have you been doing stand up? And I was like, I think it was like 4 years at the time, maybe 3 years. And he's like, okay. And he's like, you have 10 minutes? And I was like, yeah, I have 10 minutes. And it was very much like, he wasn't being a dick, but it was also the line of questioning. It was very aggressive. And I was just like, so then in my mind, I was like, man, fuck this dude. Like, I'm going to kill for 10 minutes. And then when I come off, it's going to be a different thing. And I guess that's one of those things too. You work with so many comics, you're probably at his level, that you're probably just like, everyone's trying to be, trying to like kiss the ground that you walk on. Right. So I was just very much like I was looking at my notes. I didn't really talk to him too much before the show. I do my set. And then as we're exchanging kind of like the handoff, because there's like some music that he had playing before. So I had like a minute with him right after my set. And when he went on, so then he was like really nice. Like after I did well, it was one of those things, it was a classic like comic thing. He's like, I'm not going to talk to you until you do well and prove yourself. And now I'm like, okay, I'm going to be cool with you. But because of that show, I got like a ton of followers on Instagram and Facebook that were all this really dialed in Indian crowd. So I feel like his crowd is, if I ever were to go to India to do stand up, which I want to at some point, I'd hope to get those people out because they were like a great comedy audience. And it made me feel good about being Indian because I was like, there is fans that get this type of humor that are not just like what you think of when you think of Indian audience. You think of maybe more conservative, more uptight, but they were all like on top of every joke. And it was so fun to be like, just to look out and see everyone who looks like you. And then you do really well in front of those people. It's like more validating.
Indeed, most definitely. You also opened up for Atul Khatri as well. And what was that like?
So that was at the same venue, actually. Same venue in Skokie, and that was a few months apart. I think that was more recent, actually. And he was so like the opposite, like so warm and friendly, like really nice. He was actually like we exchanged information because he's like, yeah, I was thinking of coming by to the Laugh Factory to drop in and do a spot. He's like, I don't know if they would have put me up or known who I was. I was like, man, let me know. Like I'll intro you if I can. Like he's a pretty big deal too. Like he's not small beans at all. But his crowd, he's an older comic, so his crowd is a little bit older. So I still had a good show, but it was definitely like a lot more traditional Indian speakers. It wasn't this like younger crowd that Zakir had, but as a comic, he was just such a nice guy. Like he was just like, yeah, let's stay in touch. Like we're friends on Facebook, like he's just a nice guy. He's just very accessible. And he's really funny. Like he kills. And I think what I appreciate about people, he's one of those guys, he's like a classic old Indian man who's like still sharp and still like brutally honest. Like he just comes out and just starts like roasting the audience, and he's just a really nice guy. And I like him a lot. I want to work with him again, honestly. But like it was interesting because he's just like, I would expect him to be the one who's kind of standoffish because he's older. But that's like goes to show you never can judge any of these people before you meet him, because he turned out to be like the nicest man ever. So it was just really funny. But after I'd done the room before too, I was like, I felt more comfortable because theater gigs are very different. So I was happy to be back there. And he's like, just do whatever you want. Like he didn't even care. He's like, do whatever you want and then bring me up. So it was awesome.
Awesome. And we spoke of stand-up NBC earlier, and what was your favorite memories from this whole experience with stand-up NBC?
So that was I think that was 2018. What they do, if people don't know, basically you're showcasing for NBC to be like to potentially get like a talent deal. It's kind of like a little bit honestly confusing about what the end goal is. It's more of just as credit to say you did it. You kind of like they do all these cities, they showcase in a bunch of cities, then they pick the top comics from each city, and then they do a big showcase in LA, and then that showcase has like industry and stuff. And you can get, like get on NBC shows, etc. from that. But basically within your own city, it's like bragging rights to be like one of the comics who were chosen in your pool of all the comics. So what they do though is, because it's like an audition showcase type thing, everyone can do it. They don't limit it to like who can do it. So what they used to do is you basically have to stand in line, and then they take the first 100 comics, and then they let you do a minute audition. And if you do well, they'll call you back. You do 2 or 3 minutes, and if you do well on that, then they put you on the show for your city, and you do like 5 or 7 minutes. So you're in line, like, so every comic in Chicago is there. Like, we're all standing in line. I think it was like, luckily it wasn't, it was during summer, I think it's when it takes place, so that wasn't cold. But we stand in line at like, I think starting at like, it was like 2 a.m. or something. It was crazy. Some people were there from like 10 p.m. the previous day. I think I got there at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and it's just like every comic in Chicago is standing outside the fucking Laugh Factory, and they open at like 9 or 10 is when they start taking the auditions. So it's like everything about it is fucked up, because you're not usually doing stand up at 9 o'clock in the morning. First of all, after you've been standing outside all night. So we're just standing outside. Like, it was fun. It was a fun hang because it was all comics. Like, we're making each other laugh, and, we're hanging out. But it was like miserable because you're just standing there and you can't really sit. And I remember just standing there, and then you go in, and they tell you, like, okay, you're in this block. Like, you're going to be with like 20 other people. They bring you in kind of waves. So the people who were back there who were after the first 100 were like, you're done. Like, you don't get to go up. Like, you just stood here for no reason. So I felt bad because there's probably like 50 people who came later and didn't get to go in. But then you go in with your class of like 20 people they have, and you're like, you've been standing outside for, hours. So you do your minute, and then after your minute, they then like they deliberate in the room, and then they pick out of those people to come back in a couple hours and do another showcase for them. So I do my minute, it goes well, come out, and then like we're waiting there, and they're like, okay, we want you to come back, but we want you to come back and do like 2 or 3 minutes. And then they're like, but come back in like 2 hours. So now we're all like, well, what do we do for, fucking 2 hours? Like, it's not enough time to, so me, and I remember like some comics came up from New York to do the Chicago one and Philly. So my house was like kind of close-ish. So we all go to my house and we just sleep for like an hour and a half, and then we go back. It was wild. It was just like the most exhausting day. So then we do that. And then that one went okay, because everyone's just like beaten at that point. And so that was the end of my experience, was that like I just got to that round, and then I didn't get picked for the last show, which was on the Sunday, which was an actual like show. So also keep in mind, you're doing stand up for panel. You're not doing stand up for an audience. So that's also weird. You're not performing in a traditional show sense. You're just doing it for the people in the room. So you're kind of like, I think there was a booker from some late night show was there. These are the judges, then the NBC people. So, but the good thing about that was getting to the quarterfinals was still an accomplishment. But what helped me was it got me into the Breakout Festival, because that was the same NBC people. So, and then now they know who I am. So then the next year when I did it, I just like messaged them and I was like, hey, can I just like, I don't want to stand in line. Can I not stand in line? And then like, yeah, you can just come in and do the audition. So like, most people from what I've heard do it several times before they get asked to go to LA, which is like the ultimate goal. But it's one of those things where like you're just like, you feel like you put so much time in, and then it doesn't go all the way. You're disappointed, but then you realize you're like, oh, I'm just one of 1,000 people across the country who have waited for this. So you can't be mad about it. You're just like happy to have the experience. And it's also good to learn how to do stand up for like judges and competition versus an audience. Cause what jokes you pick, how quick you get into it. You have a minute is nothing. Like, it's such a short amount of time. So how do you get your character across, your point of view across in a minute? And it's like, what do you do your opener? Like, what do you do? Do you do your closer? Like, what can't probably finish your closer if it's only a minute. So it's like, it's very interesting to pick apart your material. But yeah, that was a wild experience of just like standing out there. And now from what I heard is they don't do that anymore. Now they ask for video submissions, and then they ask people to come and showcase live. So I think they got rid of the standing outside, which is good, because that was miserable.
Indeed, I wouldn't have enjoyed that process for sure. And you spoke of the NBC's Breakout Comedy Festival as well. And what were some of those memories like from that experience?
The cool thing about that show was you get you get asked to do, if you're doing stand up, they have a couple different, like a Friday and Saturday of the weekend or when they do the stand up shows. So you get put on one or both days, but you do 2 shows. And then they have a midnight show on Saturday that you can get asked to do. And it's kind of like a special, just a for fun type of show. So I got on the 2 Saturday shows, and then I got asked to do the midnight show. So it's like a full day of comedy. Like it feels, because the show's like 9, or it's like 7:30, 9, and midnight. So, and it's like with some of the best comics in Chicago. Like these are people who are, everyone who made it to this level is like awesome. So you get to watch like all your friends, and you're just hanging out. You get to hang out in Second City's like the back rooms, and you're just kind of like there. And I trained at Second City, but I'd never been on their stages as a stand up as much. I was doing like more training stuff, improv. I'd done the open mics there, but I was never on their the stage they do it at is the Up Comedy Club stage, which is like an amazing, really well built stand up room. That they should do more stand-up at, honestly. I don't know why they don't. They do like some improv shows there, but that's where the Breakout Festival is. And it's like a amazing room. So like my parents came to that show, like it was a big deal. So it was just fun to hang out and do that. And that whole day was crazy because I had one of my shows that I produce in Chicago at a distillery. And that's like our big show. It's our flagship show. Me and Meg and Tyler produce it. So I do this first show at Stand Up NBC. I run to the distillery. I do the distillery show. Then I run back to Second City. I do the late show, and then I stay and hang out for another hour, and then do the midnight show. So I'm like back and forth. And it was just a full day of comedy, but it was so fun because I was also on the late show. I did a costume change because I was doing a different set, so I wore a different outfit. So like between the shows, there's people like, "Did you change? Like, did you change between?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, it's 4 shows. I got 3 outfits. Like, let's go." So it was just really fun because I did different material on each show, which was also cool because I'm like, let me do early show. I'll do all stuff about growing up. Late show, I'm going to do all like dirty dating stuff. And then midnight show, I'm just going to like have fun and do whatever the fuck I want. So it was very fun to do. Like, it was like one of those, like, 4 different sets, 4 different kind of spots. And it was very cool. But it was just a marathon of a day. And just like being around, you get to hang out with all these, like I said, all these people who come back to Chicago to kind of be part of the festival. And Godfrey was there. Like, so it was just a great time and such a cool vibe to be in. It's always cool to be in like a famous theater like Second City and like be part of something there and not just be there to like pay money for improv classes, be part of a performance there. So that was really fun.
Indeed. And you got to travel in 2020 and be part of the San Francisco Sketch Fest. What was that like?
Yeah, it's wild. I was just looking, I'm like, that was exactly about a year ago. When you think about that, that's how quick 2020 went by. Yeah, man, my 2020 started off so fun. Like my first show of 2020 was headlining the Laugh Factory in Chicago. And then I did Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle. And then I went to San Fran to do the the Sketch Fest. So I was like, man, 2020 is all up from here. And then in March, everything closed. So it's just really funny that I'm glad I had these experiences because I don't even think of those as 2020 credits. Like that's how removed I am from it. But yeah, that Breakout Fest was awesome. I got to be part of the comedy group out of LA. They're really funny, like Desi of South Asian descent comics, called Facial Recognition Comedy. So there's a group of women who put on these shows where the whole concept of the show is like, it's all women on the lineup, but they have a male host. And they usually book another South Asian person to host. But the whole concept of the show is like all South Asian people are not the same. Like you can have multiple people on the same show that are South Asian. You don't need to have one person kind of filling the quota. So shout out to Facial Recognition Comedy. So they got into the festival and then they asked me if I wanted to get in and host host their show. So I was like, of course, like this is awesome. I love San Francisco. The comics are awesome and the scene is great. So I got to do Sketchfest and do a bunch of shows with them, but then I also got to do a bunch of other shows in San Francisco. And since I'd been there a couple times already, I knew who like everyone was. So I hit up all the people I know in San Fran, and I was like, I got on like a ton of shows. So I just had a whole week of comedy. Like it was just such a good, like I normally go when I travel like that, I go for like maybe 4 days, 3 days, just a weekend. I ended up going on a Monday and coming back on Monday. Like I stayed for 7 days. I think I did like 13 shows in 7 days. Like it was insane. Just running from thing to thing. Like I rented a car. So it was just like a full comedy immersion. And getting to see people I hadn't seen in a while, because Sketchfest brings together so many comics. So there's like after parties and you get to network with all these comics and not just like famous comics, but also people I hadn't, I'd worked with just in like a local capacity. So it was really cool to kind of see that and reconnect with a lot of people. And I'm glad I had that experience, because now I'm like, I haven't seen anybody in so long. I feel like I've seen the same, people I'm doing shows with now, but I haven't toured, like really gone through and done it like I used to. So it was awesome. I mean, Sketchfest is just one of the best run festivals ever. It's just such a professionally run environment, and there's just so much like support for comics there. So, I mean, every show was great, and then even the independent shows, like I mentioned, were packed out. I did some really cool like underground shows that were in like art galleries and just atypical venues. So it was fun having like the Sketchfest shows and then having these kind of like just like classic independent comedy shows at the same time, and just being able to run that much time in a short amount of time was awesome. So yeah, Sketchfest is, if you can do it, I mean, it's definitely worth it.
Indeed, most definitely. Your comedy also appeared in a couple of press, including Vulture. And what was that like?
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, it was kind of random. They hit us up because we produce shows, and they were like, "How'd you get the name for this comedy show?" Like, one of the flagship shows we have is called Laugh Near Minimalist Furniture, and it's just a weird thing that we came up with because we were doing shows when we started in office buildings, and so we were the only people doing that. So we're like, what makes this space unique? First of all, it's an office building. It's kind of weird, but there's all this like weird minimalist furniture in the room. So we're like, why don't we call it Laugh Near Minimalist Furniture? Because it's a long name, but it's like it's memorable. And then we had a hashtag like hashtag LNMF. Like, so it was kind of like this hashtag that started like on every show. We just would brand it hashtag Laugh Near Minimalist Furniture. So it became this kind of branding tool. And so Vulture reached out because they're interested in that, and then like talking about comedy. So they asked me about it. So I'm like, I think I'm like quoted in something about it, but they were just like, what's the name for the show? How'd it come up? And I kind of didn't want to give too much away, because I was like, I don't want them to, the people who run the building, to be like, you're just doing shows in here? Like, what the hell? Like, I didn't want them to find out, really, because that was a sweet deal we had for a little bit. Like, that was definitely not legal at all, like, to be doing that. But we got around like some shit because, we had some connections, and it was great because we got around like people who could BYOB in the space. Like, it was definitely, like I said, very not okay to do from a regulation standpoint. But it was cool because I just got to be in that publication, and Vulture like does a lot of cool comedy shout outs. So it was fun to get on the map there. But honestly, like I like that, but I also like the local stuff too. Like getting on WGN radio, Chicago Tribune, like those kind of mean more as a Chicagoan, because you're just like, this is stuff that people, my peers and the people I grew up with, are recognizing. So to me, those kind of mean more.
Indeed. And you're also in the Chicago Sun-Times. And what was that like, opening up and seeing a story on you and that?
Yeah, that was, I mean, that's always, I think, one of the goals you have is any entertainer is like, it'd be cool to be on the front page of a paper, right? Like, that's just cool to see your face. And my headshot is so extra, just me like adjusting a tie. Like, I just look like such a douche. So I was like, imagine this photo on the fucking front page. So it was awesome because they wanted to basically feature comedians in quarantine and like some material from us. So I did like some new jokes I was workshopping. So there's actually video too, which is really cool. It's not just text. They actually took video from all of us. So I some new jokes I'd been working on in quarantine. They let me video it and send it in. And then they featured like our headshots in like a really cool kind of design, and they wrote the transcript of the jokes on the text too, which is awesome. So they got to see the video, and they got to see actually the written text form, which I think is kind of cool because it got to show like, the difference between reading a joke and seeing it presented live is obviously a huge difference. But yeah, I mean, I remember my dad, he like went to Walgreens to get the copy of the paper. Like, I don't get the fucking paper, So it was cool. I started getting tagged in a bunch of stuff. People who had seen it in Chicago were like tagging all the comics they knew. So it was just very fun to get that experience. And that actually, shout out to Zanies for that, because the guy who does the press at Zanies recommended me for that. So another connection of one other benefit of working at the club is like you get people think of you for things like that, which is really cool.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. And Vic, these are the questions I wanted to ask you if I was able to go on tour, but because of the pandemic, and I couldn't do it. So with that being said, Vic, what inspired you to perform stand-up comedy?
Ooh, I always wanted to do it. I think I knew there was like I knew I wanted to go into something in entertainment and be kind of the focal point of something, but I just didn't know what it was. But I always like whenever I'd watch comedy and whenever I'd see comedy and just people laughing, I just like wanted to be the person bringing that. And I didn't really understand that stand up was like a career option for a long time. I think I started it just for myself, just to be like, this is a cool little side hobby. It's a cool little outlet. I can just build the skill set and just have it. But then once I started like really getting into it, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. Like this is what I was put here to do. I think I need to just really get like not just do this as a hobby. Like it very quickly became like I'm just going to get really good at this, and that was my whole focus and has been. So it just clicked, and so for me it was one of those things that I was just like, I think I was just getting kind of disgruntled with working like a job, and I just was like, this is not what I want to be doing. Like I'm doing this as a means to an end, but I know this is not what I'm meant to be doing. So I think what pushed me into it was like finding that thing that I knew that I was here to do. And I was like, once I found it, I was like, okay, now that was like my whole thing was searching for what I would want to do in life. And now that I found it, I'm like, it's great to have focus. Like so many people like go about their life without focus and they don't really know what they want to do. They don't really know what their job should be. And being able to find something that it's incredibly difficult to do. It's like an endless thing that you can always work on, but still I'd rather have this than anything else. Cause at least I know this is what I like and this is what I'm passionate about. And just to discover that at my age, like 25, when I figured it out like that, I feel like most people work like 40 jobs and they hate all of them, you know? So it's kind of cool to have that. And now I feel like even if I get into something else and I don't think I can ever stop doing it now. Like it's too much a part of who I am.
Most definitely. And what was the feeling like when you first performed stand-up?
I was it was thrilling, but also then that was quickly overtaken by terrifying because I bombed like most people do, right? I just went up there. It's kind of cocky. I was watching. I was in an open mic. Everyone was bombing. It was one of those open mics where like nobody was doing well. So it gave me a false confidence that I'm like, well, I know I'm not going to kill, but at least I can do this bad. Like at least I can do the level of the room. And I somehow went below it. I was like, oh my God, like there's below zero. Like it was so bad. It was one of the most like, you know, your face gets hot. You kind of just forget everything. I said the first line and then I immediately forgot the rest because I never performed. Like I'd never done that. So I didn't know what that was going to be like. And I just was like, I got some bullet points. Like I went up there without being prepared and oh my God, it was awful. So it was thrilling, but also quickly made me realize like I wasn't shit. And I was like, I need to go get better at this. And that's when I started taking class at Second City, but I didn't do it for a couple months after that. That like really, that first bomb will will sit with you for a while, you know?
Indeed. And other than your own comedy records, what are your favorite comedy specials and comedy record albums?
Ooh, so like probably my favorite comic of all time is Patrice O'Neill. So Elephant in the Room is one of my favorite specials. And I think the other ones, like I really like Kevin Hart's early stuff. Like his first few specials are really funny. Chappelle, obviously, like when I think of the comedy specials I really, really like the ones I used to watch, I think over and over again, because that's like all I had access to, I guess. Like now I feel like I consume so much more comedy, but the people that I like really remember like their jokes is like those early Louis specials. Like even though like I'm not like a Louis fan now, I just still like those specials, like seeing those, I was like, oh, this is the caliber of comedy that I want to get to, you know? And like that was influential because it's just like when you watch, like when you're that young, you remember that stuff. Like Dave Chappelle's like Killing Them Softly and these early specials that he had were just so good and Chris Rock's early stuff. So I kind of, all the people that are like, I guess the towering people now, it's a lot of those guys because those were all just coming out when I was like younger. So for me, those were all the ones that I had immediate access to because it wasn't like as prevalent online and YouTube. It was more of like you had to get a DVD or you had to like, you had to seek it out a little bit. So, um, but those people I think were my favorite. I'm trying to think of some of the more recent. Um, I mean, like I said, Sam Morril is like one of my favorites too, just from a pure joke writing perspective is so good. But I love how people are just releasing their own shit too, which is awesome. Like he just put it on YouTube. Like that's so cool to me. Like you don't need to wait for anybody. Like I just released a free album in summer because I was like, I don't need to wait. Like let's just let it out for free. I'm not doing any of this material anyway. It was just a kind of for fun album, and that ended up trending more like than the other album for me personally, just because it was all my own fans watching it and consuming it, and I didn't charge them anything for it. So it was just a fun kind of project to throw out there. So I think people just releasing shit is cool, but now at this point, I've seen too much comedy to even remember half the shit I watch, to be honest.
Indeed. And if a couple of those folks have been on TV and film, and I want to know what your favorite sitcom, sketch shows, and comedy films are.
One of my favorite comedy films is there's a couple. I love like Judd Apatow movies, but Forgetting Sarah Marshall is like one of my top 3 favorite films of all time. Just because there's so many good lines in there, but also just because like I'm definitely like I'm a little bit of a hopeless romantic at heart, I think. So I feel like that spoke to me in a couple different levels. And so I was like going through a breakup when I first saw the movie, and I was like, man, this is so real. It's like when you hear a love song for the first time after you've been in a relationship, and you're like, man, I'm hearing this for the first time. Like there's so many nuances that I'm picking up. So I think for me, that definitely Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Funny People is also really good, kind of darker, but I think a really good comedy movie. Those two I can think of off the top of my head. Sitcoms, I think The Office is my favorite show of all time. Just the slow comedy, but also just the physical comedy and the just working, like being someone who worked, like who still has. Now I got a new gig, but I'm from the professional world. That's where I came from. So the comedy within that they use and exploit is so funny because it's just like hyper relatable. And when we started doing shows, we were doing shows downtown because we were like, what's the market that isn't really being catered to for these stand-up shows? Like all the stand-up shows are not in the place where people work. Like let's do a show, like a happy hour show where people can leave their job and go right to the show. And that's what we did. So I think there is a big amount of like a lot of the comedy I have, well, not a lot, but there's like still a chunk of it that's like work related stuff. That's like very niche, but not really when you think about it. There's like so many people work in an office. Like that's very, very typical. So I think that's why I really like The Office, but Seinfeld and Curbed are 2 of my other favorite shows of all time. Parks and Rec. Trying to think what else sitcom wise. Yeah, those are the ones that I watched like on repeat. Like I've seen every episode a couple times. But other than that, there's some other good comedy shows. I feel like on HBO I'm missing one. What is it? There's a show called Episodes, which has the dude from Friends in it. I forgot his name. But that's a random British show that's very funny. I feel like whenever I get asked these questions, I never remember. I have to go to my Netflix queue to tell you these answers, but that's a few of them.
Indeed. And your favorite sketch shows?
Sketch. So I'm not a huge, I don't like to watch sketch. That's the one, nor do I like to watch improv, to be honest, but I'm not super into it. I feel like for sketch and for improv, it's got to be executed at a really, really, really high level to be done well. And I appreciate it, like from an artistic standpoint. Like Netflix released those 2 guys, Middleton and whatever his name is, the guys who did the improv, like long form specials. Those were actually good because they're phenomenal improvisers. So, but when you watch it at like in the Chicago bar, it's trash. Like you're like, this is too long. Like get to the next thing. Like it's not good. So stand up is such an instant gratification thing that when you watch any other comedy, you're just like jaded because you're just like, where's the punchline? Like get to it. Like get to the funny part. Like I'm too impatient for this. You know, I can't watch it. So for sketch, like I do watch SNL, but it's not. I can't sit through the whole thing. I don't think all the sketches are like there. You know, it's just I'm very particular. So. There was a couple sketch shows like, The Chappelle Show that's the one sketch show that I'm like, I can watch the whole thing because it's so funny. But no one touches that. There's nothing close to that in my opinion. So I was lucky enough because they put it on Netflix again. I rewatched it all again, and I'm like, this shit still holds up. Like, it's still so good. And then Chappelle got asked to get removed, but I'm like, I'm really glad I watched it again as an adult, because when I watched it, I was like too young to understand how good it was. Like, I thought it was funny, but I didn't really get it. And now I'm like, there's so much nuance and subtlety to it that I really liked that I watched it again and reappreciated it. But now that I saw that, now my bar is again super high because I'm like, well, unless you're the Chappelle Show, I'm not watching it. I'm not watching it.
Indeed. And if you can go on tour with any comedian locally and internationally known, which comedians would you like to go on tour with?
Man, honestly, I just want to go back on tour with Tyler and Meg to start. Tyler Fowler and Megan Dirty, like I said, we used to do a thing every year where we'd go somewhere for New Year's and we'd do stand up, like we'd build a tour around it. So it was kind of our tradition, and we didn't do it last year, and it felt weird, So I just miss hanging out with them and doing shows with them, because it's fun to do shows with your friends. Like, it's one thing, we were friends before we really started stand up. Like, we were friends from improv and really just became close because of what we did. We all had day jobs, and then we started doing comedy and then found this other thing we liked together. So it transcends more than just comedy with us. But there are two people, like, locally I'd love to go on tour with. And then internationally, I think, or nationally, definitely go like hang out with Rory more and Michelle. I think would be like, those audiences would be, for my type of comedy, the comedy I do, I think would be like amazing, because it would be, up to date. It'd be like people who are smart, but also like understand jokes, like who let you go places, like, I don't want like a crowd who's like overly like uppity or liberal, but I mean like more of just like they understand these are jokes. Like, because I do a lot of stuff that's like, a lot of the comedy I do is a little bit, there's some subtext and nuance to it, but I also then have just stupid, absurd stuff. So I kind of balance it. Like, I don't want to be preachy, so I balance it with this kind of ridiculousness. And I feel like if you're like a comic like Roy Wood Jr. or Michelle, like, you're just like a joke driven stand up. And that seal bit I mentioned for Michelle is a great example. Like, she's obviously not believing, like, the joke, the punchlines are just so good that she's like, it's funny to me. Like, I don't care about the politics of it. It's just funny. So I think for her crowd would be people who understand my comedy. It's the same way. I mean, if it's funny, it's funny. I'm not trying to necessarily send some great message when I do stand up. So anyone who's got an audience like that would be incredible to kind of tour with. You always think of the big ones, but honestly, I just want people who are doing clubs, like who are doing consistent club work, like Tom Segura, like Burt Kreischer, those crowds would be incredible. I know their fans are great. Andrew Schultz, another one of my favorite comics. I got to see him at Zanies. His crowd would be fantastic because they're, again, tapped in, millennial, kind of younger crowd, but like, they want you to fuck with them. They want you to roast them. Like, they're not sensitive, and I think that's the ideal. Is like, they're the best comedy fans because they're going to support you. They're going to share your stuff. They're going to, like, push you out there and bring friends to the show, but they're also going to let you try a bunch of different jokes. And yeah, what he's done has been really cool to watch. And that's something that's also a big inspiration, is like, put out your own content, do your own shit, and then people will find you, and people will take notice. Like, don't wait for anybody. Like, just do it yourself.
Indeed, most definitely. And if you can, speaking of roasting, I promised you we get to the roast question.
Oh yeah.
Which comics would you like to get roasted by, past and present?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think when I started tweeting for the first time, I was like very anti-Twitter for a while, and then I finally now I love it now. But one of the tweets I did, I was like, the top three best roasts of me, and I listed people who have roasted me. I listed the roast that they gave, and Dan Soder's was up there. You look like a substitute teacher on parole. And then Sam Talent was, you look like a Bollywood vampire, which is pretty funny. And then I put Megan Tyler, you're not funny. Like, just straight up, you're not funny. So just a classic, simple roast, So yeah, those are some fun ones. If I got to get roasted by Patrice, I would love to be roasted by Patrice if he was still alive, because his roasts were so savage and so like psychological that I feel like I would actually be like, I would feel something. Because normally I'm just like, you laugh it off, it's a roast. But I feel like with Patrice, he would find what you're sensitive about and exploit that and pick at it. And I'd be curious to see what he perceives off me. So I'd love to be roasted by him. But yeah, if I got to, I mean, I honestly don't, I would have to know the person for me to want to roast them. You know, I don't want to roast someone I don't know. So for me, it'd be like local people, but, or like, I guess I could roast like Roy or Michelle, but I don't know them enough to do that. And then I would just feel bad. You know, I'm like, I'm sorry. Like I wouldn't want to roast them. They'd just be like, thank you for the opportunity for letting me do this with you. Like I would feel bad. So I have to really know, I'd have to really work with them for a longer time and tour with them until I feel comfortable doing that. But for then it'd just be all local comics who you guys wouldn't necessarily know.
What do you see your comedy journey in the next 5 years?
I mean, honestly, I just want to get back to the consistent shows and stage time for now. And I think for me, what I ultimately want to do is like I started headlining clubs in 2020. So just continue to get into more clubs, continue to build, another hour, like I said. I think for me, it's just all about progression. Like whatever that means. For me, that just means like writing new jokes, writing new content. I want to really get into maybe a little more like acting, a little more like comedic kind of work behind the scenes. So writing, I'm doing some writing work right now for different things. So kind of pushing those other avenues of comedy that I was such a purist of stand-up for so long that the quarantine forced me to explore other avenues that I had been not necessarily neglecting, but just like avoiding because I'm like, I don't care about this stuff. I just want to do stand-up. But now I'm like, oh, I really enjoy writing of this type, or I really enjoy tweeting, or I really enjoy putting together funny videos. So pursuing those things and keep doing those so I figure out what I really want to do in that area, all while doing stand-up. I think I realize whatever I end up doing, I know ultimately I want to keep doing stand-up. So I think getting a late night spot is probably out there, or writing on a late night show, getting a job in late night. Those are two bigger goals, but the rest of it is like, I don't try to set too many big goals. I try to set like smaller ones because that way if you set too many big goals, you'll just get disappointed because you're not getting them. But these smaller goals are like, let's knock out stuff quickly and then feel like you're accomplishing something. So for me, it's about these little micro things that I can do now. Like I said, tweet once a day. Like that's a small goal that I do. And it's like tweet a joke once a day. That gets me writing every day. So something like that. Like it's a small goal, but over time, now I have 1,000 tweets and I'm like out of the 1,000, like 10 of these could be a joke, like a real bit. So it's cool stuff like that I've started doing where I just try to make inroads in different areas. And that's it. I can't speak. Who knows? In 5 years, I might have coronavirus number 2. So I don't know what the fuck's going to happen. So I don't want to get too excited,
Indeed. And that answered my following question, which was which other forms of comedy would it venture off into, which was improv, sketch, comedy writing, acting, directing, which you answered. So what is your favorite joke a comic has written?
Ooh, there's a couple of ones I always come back to. I did this festival in Austin called Out of Bounds Comedy Festival, and I met this comic out of Atlanta, Damon Sumner, very funny dude, and he had a joke that I still just once a week I might think about it. It's such a dumb, just funny line, and he was talking about salad, and he was talking about how he hates like vegan people, and he's like the problem with salad is he's like salad tastes like outside. And I just thought that was so funny. It's just so true. It's like, oh my, it just makes me laugh every time I say it. Just such a simple way to get across so much. So I always think of that one. Salad tastes like outside is incredible. There's a couple other like kind of quick one-liners I can't think of right now, but that's the one that comes to mind first.
Indeed. And what experience would you like your audience to take with them after a set is over?
I think hopefully, you thought about something in a different way. I think a lot of what I try to do is like, it's interesting because my style of comedy is like, people are like, oh, you're like really confident on stage. You're kind of like, you're saying how it should be. But then I also always try to give a self-deprecating angle to it and like an internal kind of check. So I feel like between the two, you're going to be like, oh, that was funny that he said that about this person. But then he also brought it back to himself. And then I hope, the audience is like looking at that, be like, oh, do I think this way? Am I biased? Is my way of thinking weird? Like, I want people to kind of challenge their own way of thinking a little bit. But also just, I want them to be like, that dude was like crazy that he he did all this, and like he's memorable because his jokes were funny. Like I want people to think about it, like to remember a joke. Like it doesn't need to be some like big point. It just could be like that guy was funny. Like that's it. Because I do have a lot of people who like once I feel like I get a fan, like they do like interact. They stay kind of on top of it. Like they like that style of comedy, and then they're like they want more of it. So I just love the people who remember me and support me kind of throughout my journey.
Indeed, most definitely. And for our episode of the Stand Up Speakeasy, we're raising funds for my block, my hood, my city. And why did you pick those fine folks to raise funds for?
Yeah, they're like one of the big things that I like to do, and a lot of the shows that we produce, we try to have a charity angle, and specifically a charity angle for like diverse students or diverse people who are affected. So my block, my hood, my city is really good because it has these programs for students and youth in Chicago that are like mainly art kind of or extracurricular focused, and doing comedy, doing these artistic forms, like you can see the value they bring to people. So it's important to encourage people that don't have the privilege that someone like myself had to do these things. And I think my block, my hood, my city gives a lot of people that wouldn't necessarily have access to stuff like that. These artistic programs, they give them that kind of outlet and platform. So anything I can do to support them is always fun. And I always like working with local Chicago charities too, just because it's my city, so I want to help them. And the city's given me so much. It's like, let's give something back. So that's definitely why I chose them.
Indeed. And for this next question, Vic, you were nominated by your peers, Meg and Tyler, and a bunch of other folks. And I want to know, for people to be on Stand Up Speakeasy, you have to be nominated, and it's like a roaring 20, the prohibition. You got to know someone to know someone.
Yeah.
And with that being said, it's a society of stand-up comics. So, Vic, with that being said, which comics would you like to see on a future episode of the Stand Up Speakeasy?
Ooh, let's see. I'd like to see Jarrell Scott Barnes. Oh, hold on, I'm getting a call here. Give me a second. I'm back to back with interviews today, man. You got me. You got me on press day.
Oh,
hold on. I'm so embarrassed. This is unprofessional.
You're fine.
This just goes to show the people, man. I will do any show. That just goes to show people I will do anything. So I think Jarrell Scott Barnes, Chicago comedian, very funny dude. Luca Farrow, another Chicago-based comic. Peyton Ruddy, other Chicago-based. Trying to think other people who are. Yeah, this guy I mentioned, Zahid. Let me give you his. He's very funny too. He's out of Houston. Zahid Dowju. He's great. There's a few people for you.
Awesome. Fantastic, Vic. And Vic's information is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and it's scrolling on the bottom. So I'm trying to raise as many likes and subscribers as possible during the pandemic for you. And Rick, you're welcome. And trying to put some money in your pocket with your Venmo, which is scrolling on the bottom. Visit tmuscomedy.com. Book Vic, Tyler, and Meg if you can after the pandemic's over, during, and donate to my block, my hood, my city. Vic's a very busy guy, and it's his press day. And thank you so much for taking time out to do the Stand Up Speakeasy. It's an honor and a pleasure to interview you. And I'm glad I got all three of you on the show. And are there any final words you'd like to give out to the audience at home?
No, thank you for saving the worst for last. I appreciate it. Thanks for doing that. I actually got a Venmo request for money. They're like, give me my time back. That was bad. You need to interview better. So no, I'm kidding. I appreciate it. No, man, it was good. It was good talking with you. Thank you for everyone for listening. Like I said, like you said, you can find me on all the social media, just at Vik Pandya. New jokes every day on Twitter, new content coming out all the time. Hit me up with what you'd like to see, and I'll do it. And I'm also doing like some live shows here and there, some private shows. So just check out my schedule. I list all my dates on my Facebook page, just at my name, Vik Pandya, so you can see where I'm going to be next. I think I'm headlining a show in a couple weeks in Indiana. So that's the state of things. So we're doing shows everywhere we can. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for messing with me these last few years. And let's keep doing comedy. Let's keep it going.
Absolutely. And all of Vic's information's in the description box below on the YouTube channel, on the YouTube video. So you don't have to keep up with scrolling up there on the ticker. And thank you again, Vic. And I'll see you in Chicago when I go visit in October. And
Yeah, looking forward to, man, sharing the stage with you and meeting in person.
awesome, fantastic. Looking forward to the days. And for everyone else, please wear a mask, be safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Stand Up Speakeasy. Be well, everyone, and see you soon.